Look, it's great to have so many people here. My name is Professor Perry Hobson. I'm based here at Sunway University in Malaysia. So welcome again to another exciting show of 30-minute talks. We've got a great show lined up. Let me introduce my colleagues, Dr. Andy and Alan.
I'm in from the Philippines, and I was in the mice industry, and I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit about that later. Alan?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As we said before, I'm speaking to you from Perth, Western Australia, and in fact, I've also had some experience in the mice industry, so we'll share some of those thoughts with you later on.
Ah, very good.
And me too, and I'll introduce Rod in a moment. So, academic partners, we would really like to thank because we started this many months ago, and we really want to thank our academic partners for helping us along the way on that journey. My colleagues here at Sunway University, Lyceum of the Philippines University, the ICE accreditation body, COREP, Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Educators in the Philippines, our friends at Silver Mountains School of Hotel Management in Nepal. Thanks very much. Great to see you joining us as well. Our colleagues from Hospitality and Tourism Education in Macau, NCUT from Kaohsiung in Taiwan, our friends at the University of Hawaii, and HELI down in Australia, Higher Education Learning Institute, and the University of Santo Tomas. So again, to all of you, thanks very much. And to all the students from those institutions, welcome. It's great to have you on board and to see you again. Now,
we should throw a special thank you to all the students for joining us, because I believe this is one of the first weeks that they've been back from their breaks, Perry.
Yes, I think you're right. I know many universities are coming back. I also know around Asia, a lot of universities have been delayed on their return because of COVID outbreaks and lockdowns. And so some universities, I think, have got a bit of a delayed schedule. So for those of you who are back in session now, it's great to, we hope you had a good break, and it's wonderful to see you back. Now, without further ado, let us move on to our 90 seconds. Now, this week, we've got a 90 second that's going to focus on clean your room. This is a regular feature of our 30 minutes talk, and over to you, Andy.
Welcome to 90 Seconds. I'm Dr. Andy Nazarechuk, and today I'm going to ask you to clean your room. Admiral McRaven gave the commencement speech to the University of Texas at Austin in 2014. That speech has been viewed nearly 10 million times. I highly recommend that you find it on YouTube and watch it. In his speech, he started with the first thing to do each day, which is to make your bed. But today, I'm going to ask you to clean your room. Cleaning your room means more than decluttering or cleaning up your messy room. We are in the hospitality and tourism industry, and if you can't keep your own room in order, then why would I hire you? It means getting organized, cleaning up your schedule. Do you have a calendar? Is it up to date? Do you use it daily? It means cleaning up your plans for the short and long term. Do you even have a plan? It means for you to review your future goals. Do they need to be reevaluated too? No excuses. During the shutdown, you have the time for all of these things. Now is the time to show your parents, teachers, friends, future employers, and yourself that you are ready to clean up your act and get ready for the future. You have access to more information than ever before. You can learn how to do just about anything online. So the real question is, why aren't you doing it? The one question that I will be asking job applicants after the pandemic is over will be, what did you accomplish during the shutdown? Thank you, and that is all for today's 90 seconds. Very good.
Well, very good, Dr. Andy. I think that's an excellent point that you've made there. And, you know, I think so many people now are realizing that their home and their room has become their backdrop. And I think we've seen so many Zoom sessions, whether it's been on public television, whether it's been on webinars, and having that room cleaned up and having your work environment, which for many people has now become their bedroom or their living room, has been a big change. And I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes I think when I'm listening to people and watching people on TV, I'm more interested in the room they're in and seeing all the junk they've got lying around there. It becomes kind of interesting. So thanks very much for that. And I think that's really good words this week to think about how to clean up your room. Now, we've got a wonderful guest speaker, who's joining us this week. And as you've seen, our opening poll was about what is the mice industry. I'd like to welcome Rod Kamleshwaran, who is joining us from Melbourne in Australia. And Rod is a partner with Gaining Edge. He's got many, many years of experience in mice industry. He's done a lot of work with mixed-use developments, working with the government and private sector clients on a variety of different projects. And those projects have included projects in Singapore, Tokyo, here in KL, in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, Christchurch in New Zealand, Oslo, Cyprus, Bologna, Los Carlos, Nairobi. Gee, Rod, this is really like a travel itinerary here, I tell you, with this sort of world experience on mice. So look, he was involved a lot with consultants, a group called PwC, for those of you who know those, doing a lot of feasibility studies, and has got over 20 years of experience in that. So welcome to 30 Minutes Talks, Rod. It's great to have you joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Let's see if I can get my screen going. How's that?
Looking good. Great.
All right. Thank you, Perry. Thanks, Alan, for that introduction to that mice market. Yes, certainly a trick one. And I think what I'm going to share here is probably going to get people thinking even a little bit more, because that's one of the inherent issues in this industry, is that there isn't, quite a uniform name as we'd like to think. In Asia, we do typically refer to it as mice, but it's also often referred to as the meetings industry, particularly in North America, and business events industry here in Australia, and even business tourism. But hopefully through the course of this presentation, you'll get a sense of essentially what types of events we're talking about when we refer to mice. This here is probably a really good reflection of why the industry is on its knees right now. There's a whole range of things that mice needs, but the three most important things that mice is conditional on is travel, large gatherings, and physical interaction. And as we know that under the COVID-19 environment, all three have been restricted. We've literally been grounded. The period of lockdown outside of China really began around March. And it wasn't too long, by the 6th of April, that WHO reported that 96% of destinations had put in place travel restrictions. And as expected, by April, travel volume came crashing down by about 95%. And of course, it continued to slide. I think at its peak, ITA reported that travel volumes had dropped down by 98%. Of course, venues all over the world closed down very rapidly at an unprecedented pace, really. And many of those venues returned as quarantine centers, testing centers, and temporary hospitals. Thousands of meetings and conventions got cancelled or deferred. It's difficult to put a dollar value on this because mice industry is diverse, but the exhibition industry led by UFI made an attempt to value the business that had been lost, and just the amount of business lost for Q2, which is April to June, was quantified at $150 billion, keeping in mind that just one of the many segments of mice. It's very likely that the loss in business is a good 2-3 times that amount. And of course, the clock is still ticking. By the time the year's up, the annual value of mice has been estimated at about $1.1 trillion in direct expense. It's very likely that between half to three quarters of that would have evaporated this year. So we're now in August, and around June we started seeing wide-scale relaxations happening. So are we now in this life after lockdown? Are we in the new normal? Not quite. I've prepared this chart here to sort of help demonstrate what we see as sort of three phases in this journey. We are largely out of this lockdown phase. Of course, there are still some countries, including India and some parts of Australia, of course, they're still suffering from outbreaks, so they're still in lockdown. But by and large, a lot of countries have started opening up at some level. So we're now in this transition phase. It's still quite volatile and quite uncertain, and still, as we reopen, there's risk of outbreaks and lockdowns again. But we are in this phase which is quite unstable. So to us, the new normal won't begin until we've reached that stable phase. And that's not likely to be until we've got effective vaccination in place. So it seems very unlikely, and we hope it happens sooner, but it seems very unlikely that this is going to happen anytime before late next year. I mean, we've heard of V-shaped recoveries, we've heard of U-shaped recoveries, we've heard of L-shaped recoveries. When I looked at the chart, that we developed based on travel projections, it sort of reminded me of the Nike swoosh. So our chart is a little bit more of a Nike swoosh recovery chart. There's about close to 100 countries that have already opened their borders to some level. The official number is 87. That's been given by UNWTO, reported at the end of end of July. Since then, about a dozen or so other countries have announced opening. So somewhere around 100 odd countries. Of course, a lot of them are in Europe, led by the European summer demand. So there's 40 odd countries in Europe and Americas and Africa and Asia that have started opening. But we've still got more than 100 countries, including where I am, Australia, where the borders are still fully closed. Hotels in large markets like China and USA, we've seen largely led by the domestic markets. Occupancies are starting to move back up, so they're around that 50% mark or more in the case of China. But outside of those two big regions, it's very much around that 20% or less. Recovery in the MICE industry and the hotel industry is being led by domestic markets, but it still has some really good examples of large events, particularly in China, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Germany. And of course, the Chinese market, of course, is anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks ahead of the curve, because their whole journey of COVID started earlier, so they got out of it earlier, and they're of course responding ahead of the curve as a result. And when I say large events, and I'll show you some photos later on, some of these have 30, 40, 50,000 attendees. So in environments where COVID is now under control, they have been able to get to a reasonable level of activity in the MICE market. Of course, very, very domestically focused. But what we're seeing is, by and large, in most other places, and including those countries, that there's a gradual shift to virtual meetings, events like this, where events are being held in an online environment, and an increasing level of announcements of hybrid events, where you've got a component of in-person physical events being expanded with speakers and attendees joining online. And we're also seeing announcements of a lot of what we call multi-location meetings, which are hybrid in the sense that there's physical attendees, let's say, in regional hubs of Singapore, Dubai, and London. So people are gathering in regional hubs, and then they're joining in online to create a more broader global event. And this sort of trend might stay there for a while, whilst there's a hesitance to travel further, and there's a hesitance to be part of very large groups. Of course, there's an acceleration of digital trends. The customer experience is quite different at the moment. We're seeing venues managing this new experience through contactless registration, thermal scanning as you enter venues, face masks, heightened level of hygiene, a lot of it done manually, a lot of it being done on an automated fashion, and in some cases social distancing. In a lot of cases, like in China, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, in New Zealand, there's no social distancing requirements, even though some of them do have some caps on the total number of people they're letting in. So how long will this last? Look, it's hard to say, but I expect it'll last until, as I said, we reach a point of clarity and stability, which can really only be if we find a treatment or a vaccination. There's a lot of optimism about the vaccine, but even once a vaccine is available, it'll take time to distribute the vaccine and reach a point of effective vaccination. Can you imagine vaccinating billions of people? And even then we'll have to wait for travel confidence, and economics will play a part. So right now, we're in this transition phase. It's evolving, but there are primarily three types of events. As I've said, the traditional face-to-face physical meeting events are still occurring. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places, and more countries are being added to that list. There's a lot of virtual events, and there's hybrid events. In this example, this is in Korea. This is an example of a traditional face-to-face event occurring. This particular event, I think, had something like 20,000 people. I don't know if you can see the numbers in those photos. If you look in the bottom right corner, that's probably the one you want to start with. So it shows that the customer experience is quite different. So they're coming in and they're doing sort of a digital contactless registration. They're not going to a counter. And then they're going through thermal scanning, temperature check, contactless temperature check, and in the event people are flagged, there's a nursing station, not too far from there where anyone that's flagged is diverted that way, and the rest go through. And when they're in the actual event, you can see this is a trade exhibition, and you've still got booths, you've still got people doing displays and demonstrations, obviously in the safety of face masks and so on. And that whole environment is supported by enhanced level of hygiene. There's a whole bunch of photos you can see on the bottom left-hand side where, high touch points are being regularly cleaned between sessions and every day, and in some spaces multiple times in a day. So that's what holding events in a traditional way in the COVID world looks like. And look, that's happening because this industry can't stop forever, and it can't stay waiting for a vaccine till June or August or December next year. So countries have taken strong measures to try and, in a managed environment, get back to some form of normalcy with these sort of events, obviously focus on the domestic environment. But China and Taiwan are claiming that some of the events have had international participation because they do have some travel corridors. So they've got approved people, particularly exhibitors, that have been able to come to their shows. The second one is an example of a virtual event, like ours. There's increasingly corporate meetings and conferences that are being held in this sort of hybrid environment where you've got a mix of online as well as face-to-face. And on the bottom left, you'll see an example of that multi-site hybrid type event that I was talking about. This is, UFI is an exhibition industry organization. It's the world's leading sort of exhibition association. And you can see they've announced their Congress in November, which will take place in 3 regional locations, which will then connect into a global conference. And there's lots of those types that are being announced at the moment. And look, it doesn't mean that that's what they'll stay as forever. Some may stay like that for longer periods, but a lot of them we expect will return to that traditional environment, but still have some components of hybrid. And look, we'll talk about that more. And this is the space that most people are talking about. This is where all the real estate and all the noise is on, but in actual fact, there's less of it actually happening. And this is the 100% virtual events. These are 3 examples that I'm sharing with you, that have either taken place or have been announced. And these are within, one of them is actually a mice industry event where about 1,500 participants and a range of speakers are expected to be held next month. There's one on the bottom left-hand corner, and this is the more difficult space. I think holding meetings and conferences, as you can imagine, is challenging, but it's still relatively easier to manage than trying to do an exhibition. But the technology in this space is evolving quite rapidly now that we've been thrust into this space. So in that example, you can see there's exhibitions being held using 3D technology that allows visitors to attend a virtual trade show where with avatars, they're walking through the exhibition floor, going past different booths where they're able to experience the products which you would otherwise be physically looking at using 3D software. And one of the things that's become incredibly useful in the mice space is gaming software, which has started being used to leverage to create the next level of enhanced virtual meeting and event management software. So ironically, whilst technology has been a disruptor in this industry and many other industries for a very long time, we've now been disrupted by COVID, and we're leaning towards technology to almost take us out of this, and technology is going to be fundamental to the new normal. So the big question, will virtual meetings take over? The answer is not quite. There's for sure a significant proportion of events that will be substituted by the technology, by virtual meetings, more in some segments than others. But the shift to digital is happening now. It's inevitable, it will happen. But physical interaction remains very powerful. And there's, of course, also cultural nuances. Face-to-face meetings are highly regarded in Asia. Personal interactions can't be easily replaced. There's a range of reasons that people go to conferences and exhibitions. Professional development is an important part of that. But one of the most important part of that attendance is networking, making new connections, catching up with old connections and friends. So that's not going to be easily replaced. And of course, there's the knowledge sharing aspect. There's a recent Harvard study, and I've put a hyperlink at the bottom there for those who are interested to see more about it, highlights the fact that meeting in the virtual environment is nothing new. It has existed for a long time, yet moving people has remained endemic. This Harvard study shows that business travel causes economic growth. There isn't just correlation, there's direct causation. It highlights that know-how can only be effectively transferred physically from brain to brain. It's quite interesting, the study really. Why physical connection facilitates this better knowledge transfer, and how much new technologies will be able to substitute this is, of course, a question that remains and, you know, is only getting heightened in this COVID environment. But the bottom line is in-person events will survive, but as I was saying, with a huge shift to hybrid type of events. It'll be very common to see convention centres, convention exhibition centres and hotel venues to offer all three options, you know, the physical in-person meeting and event options, as well as hybrid options, as well as virtual options. Now you might ask, why will these physical buildings and venues competing with the virtual space offer virtual meeting options? Well, frankly, they all have to offer hybrid options. And to do that means they will have to invest in technology infrastructure, virtual reality studios, broadcast facilities, and things like that. Because not all these events can be held just using software like we're doing this meeting. Delegates attending you know, a half day or a multi-day event is going to expect to see more than just the presenters' faces. They'll expect a simulation of the experience that they have when they're in that actual conference or meeting building or that ballroom. They'll expect to see more than just faces. They'll expect to see a full live interaction of speakers, of forums of multiple speakers, which will require not just software but technology hardware to facilitate that. So, you know, virtual reality studios, broadcast facilities, you know, it's expensive tech. So once venues have invested in the tech, they'll want to monetize that beyond just that hybrid. So invariably they will offer that to customers who want to have their virtual events, and they'll have the infrastructure to do that. But you can imagine that's not cheap hardware. And of course, over time, as the demand is increasing, the hardware will become cheaper. But it will be a while before this long-term, what do you call this, expensive tech is as prevalent as the video conferencing software, you know, which is very readily available to everyone with computer and an internet. So it's going to be much easier for virtual attendees, but not quite as easy for presenters spread across the globe to be able to just jump into a studio to participate in a high quality presentation of virtual experience, because the customers, the consumers will still want a high quality interactive experience. You know, we can't sit for 4 hours, you know, just looking at a screen and a face and some slides. There's going to have to be more than that. And these are some of the reasons why that this virtual space hadn't been able to evolve at the pace that many people had predicted 10, 15 years ago when video conferencing technology and virtual meeting software started entering the market. So venues will need enhanced tech infrastructure. The whole journey will change. You know, it's not going to be just about the event experience. The digital space will influence the touch points throughout the event journey, starting with how customers, especially event organizers, will evaluate and assess buildings, destinations and centers. They'll rely more greatly than they do today using virtual tours, virtual software to understand the offerings of a building, the setup options and so on, instead of like they do today. They fly into their destination to do a site inspection. So that'll compete quite aggressively with the options to be able to undertake that. Of course, supported by salespeople to undertake that, in a virtual environment, to, as we saw in those other examples, where there's going to be a higher level of digital solutions to registrations without the need, to go to counters and talk to people and so on. And then within the event hosting space, there's going to be a whole range of things that'll give confidence to visitors and organizers that in the event there is another pandemic, that this venue is able to handle those sort of things. So the future playbook of MICE venues is going to be quite strongly underpinned by technology, but they'll also have a very strong theme in agility and resilience, because I think unlike this time, we'll all be investing in a higher level of preparedness for the next pandemic, even if there isn't one for another 30 or 50 years. But I don't think we're leaving things to chance as we've done in the past. So with that, I will open it up to discussion with our other expert MICE panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Rod, for that. It's giving us a bit of an insight onto how things are changing, and they certainly are. Last year, I was quite happily being at different conferences, whether it was speaking at events in China. I was speaking at an EduTech event in Singapore. And then just yesterday, Dr. Andy and I were doing one for EduTech. But again, this was in the Philippines, but we never left our offices again. So it's been quite challenging watching the world shift from doing very, very physical events and to suddenly finding everybody that you're talking to is online. And you've suddenly got, conferences and events being held that way. And the challenges you pointed out about doing them, and the economic impact, because in many destinations, events are really significant drawers. We heard a few weeks back from a show in Las Vegas, where again, exhibition industry has been hit really, really hard. And obviously countries like Germany, places like Hong Kong, etc., Singapore really are important on that. So it was interesting because normally I go to the SMX Center in Manila for this EduTech event, which was focusing on the challenges of education technology. And Dr. Andy and I were at that yesterday, but we had to do it all from our office. So very, very different. So thank you so much for those insights to what we got there. Now, we have got quite a few questions floating around as well. So I'm going to turn to those quickly, because one of them has come from Tina Aquino. She said, in terms of curriculum enhancement, what do you think are going to be new competencies that students are going to need to deal with this new hybrid environment, Rod? What can you see there?
Look, I think that's going to cut across the whole life cycle of event delivery, starting from sales and marketing. So there's going to be an expectation that there's a higher level of technology soft skills required to be able to do remote selling, to be able to market more aggressively in the digital space, right up to the types of skill sets that are going to be needed in the venues. And a lot of venues don't actually have on-site tech people. They're now going to have studios and things, so they're going to need, different skill sets than they have today.
Right. So we've got a whole lot of new skill sets that are going to be needed to be able, because even when I've been at conferences in the past and they've tried to video people in, it's been about 50-50 as to whether it's worked or not. There's always been some glitch, to be honest with you, which I think is why people have tried to stay away from it, but that seems to be improving. Andy, Alan, over to you.
Actually, one of the things you said, Rod, was about what I remember showing when you go into an exhibition, you're walking down the aisle looking for that one thing you were looking for. That was great, but it was the booth next door where you actually saw something and found something. And the other thing we said, the physical part of it, I was thinking that they usually do like a showcase for new products, and they put those people up front and they let them show their products. Can you see, we're using that 3D interaction, people want to having a focus group live with someone touching and feeling some new product out there, so that the people who are sitting on videos can get a reaction, not from the salesman, because they always say it's wonderful, but someone who has never seen the product before.
Yeah, absolutely right, Andy. It's absolutely difficult to replicate that experience. You know, so absolutely, there's certainly compromises to that. That's why, you know, and particularly for the exhibition market, our view is that when things settle, when we get into the new norm, they are going to revert back to having the physical events. They will have a hybrid component so that it can extend to a wider market. But for people for whom that's important, they will want to provide that opportunity for them to get there face to face.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions I've got, Rod, it links to Christina's other question there around the MICE industry and repurposing events if it doesn't quite get back to that physical, but you outlined the importance of the contact, the networking, the learnings from each other, all those things. And I think that study that you relate to is very, very important. Because I also think about the MICE industry, not only in specialized venues, but, you know, many hotels have also invested heavily in the space. And so there's the kick on accommodation, the kick on food and beverage, and all those other support services that come along with the MICE industry that I think are also being impacted, and will, if it does go down the virtual pathway, will continue to be impacted. So I think there's many other aspects to this thing than just simply the industry itself.
Look, absolutely. I mean, Perry, you mentioned Hong Kong and Singapore, and they're leading MICE destinations, so they're great examples. And they are two countries that claim that between 15 and 18% of all their travel is attributed to the MICE visitors. And as you've said, Alan, that when they come to events, the flow and impact is far greater than whatever time or money they've spent going into that venue. Compared to leisure customers in most markets, MICE customers spend 2 to 3 times more, because, you know, they're staying in hotels, they're going to that activity, the primary activity they've come for, but they also do a lot of leisure activities. They do a lot of shopping in Hong Kong and Singapore, wherever else they've gone. They, you know, spend money on bars and nightclubs and entertainment. So for that reason, other than those other reasons we talked about, that it generates trade and intellectual engagement, governments have got a very, very strong interest in making sure that this doesn't just evaporate, that, you know, they've got a significant level of this that they can retain at a physical in attendance level where people are coming in. So for those reasons, whilst all this stuff in the digital space will continue to happen and will shift some of the events down that space, we expect that there's going to be an aggressive push from governments and policymakers to try and counter that, to bring in physical events. Space will become a lot more competitive. So countries and cities where the governments aren't sophisticated enough in understanding the broader implications of not having those people and not doing the right policy initiatives to continue to attract what is going to be a tightening market for some time, will suffer. But as we've seen, Hong Kong and Singapore are not waiting for anyone. They have already aggressively announced literally hundreds of millions of dollars for the MICE sector to try and keep it going, but to try and make sure that whatever is evolving is happening in their space.
You know, Rod, the one thing I want to say, you mentioned the broader picture. You know, the purpose of conventions and exhibitions and meetings and all these things is to bring people together to sell new products, to share, to learn new stuff. So the unintended consequences of not having this industry is everything else is going to slow down. You're not going to see the new car. You're not going to see the new refrigerator. You're not going to see all these new things that they bring to these shows, or you're not going to go to that one lesson, the doctor's convention, where they're showing you new technology. So the cascading effect of not having conventions affects the whole world in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, those numbers I shared were from CIS done by Oxford Economics, and that's $1.1 trillion in direct expenditure. There's a range of economic impact studies out there, and some of them have put the value at as high as $3 trillion. You know, so, you know, the flow-on impact is so huge. You know, it's 2 to 3 times that in some countries.
Yeah, but don't you think, right? I mean, given that we know in some countries you can't have more than 5 people in your house. I mean, putting together 10 or 20,000 people in some of the big exhibitions and so forth is really going to be very difficult for us to do even in the near future, unless a vaccine appears and so forth. So, do you think that's really likely to be happening in the near future? I mean, what sort of timescale do you think these sort of big events, because as you mentioned, some of them are really significant, but we've got some really significant challenges we're facing with these things?
Look, there's certainly not a uniform solution across the board. Different countries are at different stages in the sort of level of suppression of COVID. So that's sort of driving, you know, the level of activity that they're allowing. But the reality is, as I've said, it seems unlikely that at a global level we can reach sort of what you'd want to call a post-COVID environment till a good 12, 18 months from now. And given the value and importance of MICE events that we've all just talked about, we can't wait 12 to 18 months, which means that regardless of all these challenges, we need to figure out a way to still go on with these events, even though there are restrictions. So in some countries, for example, Thailand, they've been able to convince the government that you've got to treat my sector differently to other things. So yes, have the limits on sports and entertainment events, but the economic impact and the trade implications of MICE is so large that you can't apply the same rules. So they've been given exceptions to host MICE events, of course, under very strict protocols and guidelines. And as long as the operators are following the rules strictly, and they can maintain it in a safe environment, you know, that we'll be able to continue going on. So they're doing that. You know, even in Australia, in Queensland at the moment, you could host, you can host an event with thousands of people, but of course Queensland's market isn't large enough, so we're not hearing about too many events happening.
Right. Yeah. Look, we've got a number of other questions coming, but I'm very mindful of time this week. So Joy, thank you for your questions, and Evelyn that you've posted there. But I'm just mindful that we're running out of time this week. And so Rod, thank you so much for the insights that you brought us about the MICE industry, because as you mentioned, this is a very big industry. It's a very important industry. It's one that, you know, we really need to, as you mentioned, understand a lot more about the economic impacts, the social, and just plain, as that Harvard study, which I was just reading myself this morning, highlighted how you create know-how and the economic importance of that as well. So thanks very much, Rod, for joining us on 30 Minutes. It's been great to have you here to hear about the MICE industry, the challenges, this hybrid nature, and how this bit of the industry is going to evolve afterwards. So Andy and Alan, I know we've got some wrap-up things to do this week. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, just a closing comment. Thank you, Rod. But I have to clarify one thing about MICE. It's meetings, incentives. Some people say conventions, some people say conferences, and then exhibitions. But I always add events. So I have never agreed with I agree with MICE, but MICE events and exhibitions are so closely related, because those convention centers that may not get the international travel they want may be able to do some events for the domestic market to fill them up. So that's an important thing. But Rod, your explanation of the industry is global. Thank you very much for your comments. And we appreciate you coming on, because I was the one that invited you after I read your article, and we appreciate you joining us today on 30-Minute Talks. Alan?
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. If I can just reiterate, Rod, for a very interesting presentation. And I think, as with Dr. Andy, I think we're going to rename the industry MyC from now on. And we'll stick with that. But I think from a student's perspective, there's a couple of very interesting points that are picked up. It's something that's also close and dear to my heart from my own time in the industry, is that the mice industry is much, much larger than just simply the gatherings. And that, you know, we continue to be in a space that offers great opportunities, even though we're talking about, you know, having to deal with this pandemic and the challenges that we've got at the moment. From today's presentation, I think there are opportunities that will emerge beyond this. Something that we should not forget is that the curriculum must include how to manage audiovisual, sound and technologies better. And I think there's no doubt that if students start getting your heads around some of the basic technologies that are available for this industry and many other industries, you will never be short of a job. But thanks again for your comments, and I look forward to another 30 minutes, Perry.
That's right. Yeah, and thanks again very much. I think very important, because Rod, you've actually been our first industry speaker that we brought on to 30 minutes as well. So each week we like to try something different, something new, and move. And so it's been great to have someone from the industry. And I think you're going to be the first of many who are going to be joining us in the future as we bring different people in to inform students and educators about the challenges, the issues, and of course the opportunities we see going forward. So again, another big thank you to all our academic partners and supporters. CoRep, the Somewhere University, NCUT in Taiwan, Silver Mountain Hotel School, the University of Santo Tomas, the Schindler School of Travel and Travel Industry Management at the University of Hawaii, and of course, Heli. So again, thank you all very much for your support. Now, let's think about next week.
Yeah, actually, we're excited. That's why I had my clean your room 90-second segment today, because next week, Mr. Alan Williams and I are going to be sharing with you something that we normally don't share with a lot of people: our favorite apps, how we survive in a digital world. Alan, what app are you going to share with us next week?
Well, I don't want to, I'm going to be a little bit like Rob. I'm not going to share that with the viewers today, because I'm going to want them to come to next week and find that out for themselves. So there's plenty of apps that I know you and I have both spoken with, but I do have some of my own favorites. And I think it links to that last comment that get your head around some of these apps, get your head around some of this technology, and position yourself a lot better for employment in the future.
So we guarantee if you join us next week at 30-Minute Talks, you will be more efficient no matter what. We guarantee it after one 30-minute talk next week.
Excellent. Well, again, a big thank you from all of us. And don't forget to fill in the survey. That's important as well. So Andy, I think you've got a way to make sure everyone knows about the survey and the certificates.
Yeah, and I have put the link into the chat for you to fill out your survey. And again, we give the certificate to our academic partners. And one last slide here, and we'll leave this up there for a while, is this is our QR code for the survey. So if you want to use the QR code, this will take you to our survey, where you must be an academic partner, a student academic, or faculty or staff from our academic partners. And you must put 3 key learnings. And Rod, you gave us plenty of key learnings today. And we want to thank you very much for your participation and sharing. Thank you very much. I'm signing out from the Philippines.
And for myself in Australia, everybody, thank you. And thanks again, Rod, for sharing your thoughts.
And from Somewhere University in Malaysia, again, thank you all for joining us for another 30 minutes. A big thank you to our first industry speaker, Rod. Thank you so much for joining us again. We wish you all well. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you next week for another 30 minutes and finding out about those apps. Thank you, and bye-bye.